Kristyglass here, just checking in for a little finished object for you. This is Crochet in May, which is the month that I try to dedicate as much content as possible to crocheting, because I really became a lifestyle fiber artist through crochet. I started to knit when I was very young and returned to it around my teens, early 20s, but it wasn't until my later 20s when I was experiencing a really heavy health event that I returned to crochet. And since then I have been doing more knitting than crocheting, but crocheting is still my first love. So I just wanted to share this beautiful sweater that I'm wearing. It's called Taroko by Nomad Stitches, aka Sandra Gutierrez. And I first saw this sweater, and I've only seen it actually once in person and even online, I believe, at the Sheep and Wool Festival in New York, aka Rhinebeck 2018. I saw Carlene wearing it and I thought it was so gorgeous. It really stopped me in my tracks because it was so intricate and beautiful, and I couldn't believe it was crochet. So I bookmarked it right away, and then I was on the hunt for the perfect yarn match. And I had these 3 skeins that I had picked up from Cat Sandwich Fibers at the New Jersey Sheep and Wool Festival just a little while before I saw this sweater for the first time. And I realized, I think I have enough yarn to make this sweater. I think I just need 3 skeins. Now it turns out you need a little more. It's like you need 3.5 skeins of yarn, and I'm not 100% sure that's true now that I have finished it, but before I started I wanted to make sure that I had the right amount of yarn. So I was on the hunt for more brown, and I used Ravelry to reach out to people who had it in their stash, kind of trying to convince them to sell it to me. And in the end, Cat Sandwich Fibers actually sent me 50 grams of the brown yarn. So I started with that one just in case I needed to break up the 2 brown sections, because they're not the exact same dye lot. When you're dealing with indie dyed yarn and you don't have the exact same dye lot, you have to be careful about placement. So either you're going to alternate skeins or figure out how to place them so the eye is tricked a bit. So I knew that there was this big pink section that maybe I could start with 1 lot here and do the rest here. So I used this much of the 50 grams for the first section here. And then for the second section, I only had this much left. So I don't think this would have been enough for this section. So I think it's good that I got more. You can see they're very, very similar, but the one on the bottom, I would say, is a bit more orange in color, and they definitely worked out for this finished object. The other 2 colors I used, this one is called Tam Slam. If you don't know what a Tam Tam is, or Tam Slam, let me tell you. Tim Tams, you can actually get them in the States, but I think they used to only be unique to the Australia area. And it's kind of like a wafer cookie. It's chocolate, it has wafers, it has filling, and then it has a chocolate outer coating. And to do a Tam Slam, at least what I know of as a Tam Slam, maybe you can educate me if I'm wrong, but you bite off both ends so that you can suction liquid through the wafer cookie, and you suck your hot chocolate through the Tim Tam, and then it kind of like almost immediately melts in your mouth. So that is a Tam Slam. It's really fun to try. Kids like it, adults like it. So if you've never heard of a Tam Slam, there you go. So this is Tam Slam. And then the other 2 colors I had were these gorgeous pinks. And you know, they're telling different stories. You don't necessarily think, wow, those really go together. But when you apply it to this pattern, I really think it's a home run. So this one, and by the way, I love Cat Sandwich Fibers labels, and we have an interview together, and I will link to it underneath this video so you can check it out. This is called Trusty. This is not called Trusty. That is the base. The base is Trusty. The colorway is I love you, you love me. I love you, you love me. That's the color of this yarn. And this is the 75-25 Superwash Merino and Nylon 4-ply fingering. This is 463 yards. So I actually used quite a bit of this. Crocheting, as you may or may not know, really eats up the yarn. So it starts in the collar with this color, returns here for some color work, and it uses up quite a bit. So this, I love this color so much. It has these orange flecks in it and some periwinkle, and I just think it's so beautiful. I think she's really, really good at her speckles, and I just love that about her yarn. This is my first time using Cat Sandwich. This one is Last Orchid. And it's a beautiful pink, and then it has some bold speckles in there. There's like kind of a yellow, orange, green, brown. And what I love about indie dye yarn is just the surprise it is. As you're going along, you'll have a stitch that is suddenly green. I will show you a close-up. You can see the details of that pink and just the little speckles that come through. Let's talk about the pattern. So this was my very first time doing center single crochet. And when I asked Carlene about her sweater, she said, the first thing she said in the video was something about it's fussy or it's hard, and she's so right. So if you have never done center single crochet, I would recommend definitely making a swatch. And I wanted to make the swatch anyway because I really haven't crocheted a ton of sweaters that you know, there's the high stakes. Like this is a high stakes sweater because you want it to fit correctly. It's supposed to be a cropped, you know, little number, and you want it to be right. You don't want it to be too small, too big. You want to have enough yarn. This pattern uses 3 different hooks, so make sure you have a nice hook set. I like these clover ones quite a bit. And you use 2 hooks that are similar in size and then one that's quite a bit smaller. And so I did this swatch. I feel like, I don't know, maybe this is all the swatching I did. I sometimes cheat on my swatch and only do like 2 inches instead of 4, but it was really important to do the swatch not only for gauge, but to practice the center single crochet. I ended up using a video by Moogly, Tamara of Moogly, who's also been on my channel. I'll link to that interview as well, to help me with this stitch. It was a bit tricky for me. I had a hard time getting it, and this is what it looks like. It kind of gives a fabric that is similar to knitting in that it has these very uniform V's to it, kind of like stockinette stitch. It's a really tricky stitch, and it's all about your gauge. So I am a tight knitter and a tight crocheter. I think I'm just a little tight, and you have to really loosen up that crochet and get in the rhythm so that you can get into the center, because it's not only is it tricky to get in the center because it's center single crochet, but also because it's fingering weight yarn, and it's also sock yarn, which can be a little more splitty. This yarn at least doesn't have that twist to it, like some like 2-ply kind of twisty sock yarn. So it wasn't a huge problem. I've worked with way more splitty yarn, but sometimes it splits a bit because it's that really fine wool. I noticed that I was really tight at the beginning, and I finally reached my stride around here. Like, it took me that long, and by the end, I was pretty good. One of the tips in the pattern, which I think is fine to share with you here, you'll see on a hook, there's the point at the top, and then there's the point right here. It's like when you're drawing a 1, it's like the so this second point right here, the one right there, that is really good for getting into those center single crochets. You kind of have to lead with that and then rotate to do your stitch sometimes. Other times you can just poke the normal poke with this point here and get through the center single crochet, but a lot of times I was using this hook to get in there, and this is almost the entire sweater we're talking about. So it is a labor of love. If you are not accustomed to center single crochet and color work in crocheting, this will be a rude awakening for you. But for me, I was determined to learn it. I always want to learn something new with my projects most of the time, unless I'm doing like a palette cleanser, just like throw it together project. I usually want to learn something. So I had been accustomed to carrying the yarns double, like together. I've done that before with crocheting just to weave in an end, just to like avoid weaving in ends. So that's a skill. You have to hold the strand and then you have to switch the colors. And it can be a little bit fussy and require some concentration. There was one section, let's see, I can't even remember. I think I took a picture of it, but there was a whole section that I was working the color work, and I just was counting correctly, but I somehow missed like the whole point of a triangle. And I had gone so far, and I thought, well, I do not want to rip back just to put in those 4 stitches that I missed. So I kept going, And then I double stitched over those V's to make up for the pattern. I'll try to find it and put a close up in here because I can't even remember where it is now. But that was so frustrating when I realized that, but I was so grateful that I wasn't off my count. Something that I struggle with in crochet, and I don't know about you, I just don't know enough about crochet, is that when I get to the beginning of the round, it always seems to shift like one stitch every single time. So that was something I kind of had to watch for when I was working these charts, because it's easy to get off at the beginning of the round, and I just kind of went rogue, as I always do with crochet, and just made sure the pattern looked right as I got to that beginning of round, and then I kept going. That was my strategy there. The lace part is really beautiful and very fun. You can see there's a lace panel here, here, and here, and I do recommend going down the crochet hook size for that. I'm not sure why it matters, but it does keep it very uniform when you do that. One thing I thought was so great about the design of this is in this lace section here, the first one, the lace has a row of stitches before and after. And in the front, it's just a short crochet stitch, and in the back, it's a longer crochet stitch. So that naturally raises the back. So I don't know if you'll be able to tell. You can kind of see proportionally, this is thinner. And then when I turn around, you can see that it's thicker on the back. So that was such a smart design element to make up for the need to lift the back, raise the back. And it was just on that section that it was addressed, nowhere else. So I loved that so much. When you go to the sleeves, don't forget to regard the sleeve as an extension of this yoke. So when you go to start counting, count from the end of this pattern and then just continue the yoke there. And that was just a fluke that I figured that out. And also keep in mind, so here to here, keep in mind that these little points right here, they're going to line up with the point of the darker triangle from the row before. So you can see it will line up right there. If you're off count, you'll be starting the pattern in the lighter triangle, and that's not what you want. So make sure it lines up. So the nice thing is you can refer to the yoke that you've already completed before you tackle that sleeve, but it just kind of takes a minute to think that through before you get going, at least for me. And you know, I'm often just very elementary when I'm learning and doing these projects, but I always want to impart things that stopped me up so that hopefully it won't stop you up as well. There is an opportunity to add length here. You can add length in the sleeve, you can add length here in the bottom. I chose to just do it as written, and I did not do an aggressive block on this. I am interested to know if superwash yarn blocks differently when it's crocheted than when it is knitted. That's something I'm interested to know. But when I really love the fit of a superwash project, I am very scared to do a full wet block because it grows so much that I'm often disappointed in what has transpired from the finishing to what I'm wearing. So what I did is I just filled up my iron with some water and I did a steam iron on it. Many people talk about putting a towel between the iron and the finished object, but I've been to so many mills and seen the really hot water that is often used in the dye process that I just don't understand why. Like, you can put heat on these things, in my opinion. So I just directly ironed this out to sort of stretch out the lace a bit, stretch out the color work, and I love how it turned out. The bottom ribbing hem, I just want to give you a little caution. I think that it called for a slightly wider hem than the collar here, but I wanted it to be more uniform. So I think this was maybe 8 or 9 stitches and this was going to be maybe 11. So I made this 8 just like the top here, and then I did the same treatment on the sleeve. I know it's just a small detail, but it's less crocheting, less work, and more uniform. So I did that for the hem. And then I was working on my ribbing of the bottom one night while watching a movie with my daughter, and in the morning I looked at it and I went, this hem has grown. It's like grown. And so what I realized is I had stopped counting and I was just eyeballing it, and every once in a while I would do an extra single crochet that wasn't in the row. It was maybe kind of like on the transition, because what you're doing is you're making this and attaching it to the bottom of the sweater at the same time. So I had worked my way up from like an 8 to an 11 over about 6 inches. And so just pay attention to what you're doing, and I suggest kind of getting into a rhythm of counting like 1, 2, 3, you know, whatever the number is, so that you know if you're off. Because I had stopped doing that. I was just kind of, you know, it was late and I was just sort of following my nose. And so I had to rip back about 6 inches of ribbing to get back on track with the right number, the correct number of stitches. So those are my tips for Taroko. I love it so much. I love Crochet in May. I hope you're enjoying it and that it is inspiring you to pick up some of those crochet projects that maybe have been abandoned and return to this beautiful craft that is just so lovely and features the yarn so well. Thank you so much for joining me here at Kristy Glass Knits and Crochets, and I'll see you next time. Bye.